first presentation, which is a preview of the new plan actuarial study. And that's Doug, right?
Yep. Thank you. So this was scheduled for the July 31st meeting, and the intention at that time was to give a little bit of a sense of what to expect from our actuary who are here today, Bonnie Wurst and Sherry Christensen from PRS, present after this. You'll hear about the actual results of the study from them. The intention was to describe what that process is, and also to, I think, maybe demonstrate how pre-funding works, to the importance of that in the actuarial evaluation process for new plan. So, what we mean by pre-funding is funding of future retirement benefits done during the working lifetime. It's done in a very systematic manner. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and the goal is to try to determine what is the right way to fund everyone's retirement benefit over their entire career. With the right amount to be able to meet that goal. Pre-funding is really critical to achieving intergenerational equity. These are terms that we use a lot. So when we talk about intergenerational equity, we're talking about not shifting the cost from one group of members to another group of members, or shifting the cost from one generation of taxpayers to the other generation of taxpayers. So the concept is that each and every member of each and every one of our pension funds, through their own employee contributions and the contributions made by their employers, are pre-funding over their entire working lifetime consistently to be able to fund the benefit for them. And I have just a few examples to show it. And these are really simplified approaches. The calculations are quite a bit more complex. What we have is kind of focus on the PARA general plan. Your PARA general plan is called a defined benefit plan. That means the benefit is defined as years of service times a multiplier times final average pay. So that's the goal, is to determine what the defined benefit amount is, consider how long that's paid for, and then the actuarial process is to determine, well, how much money do you need to save by that retirement? I refer to that here as the reserve amount. You kind of work backwards and determine, well, then how much of a contribution needs to come in each year. So in this example, this member would need to have contributions from their own contributions and their employer contributions of what's $9,400 at that particular age, but it's really 11% of pay over the whole career. They'd have to accumulate almost $1.6 million in order to meet their benefit payments after that time. And this is all very simplified because there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. It's not just how much does it take to fund a benefit from retirement to age 90, some assumed age of death. There's probabilities of surviving all the way out to, I think, age 120. So it's the calculation done at every single age. Then during the accumulation period, there's assumptions made about whether the member, this happens at every single age, but whether the member is going to terminate, become disabled, die before retirement, or what their retirement age will be. So a lot of steps in the process, but it's really, I think, important to know that it takes a lot of contributions over a long period of time to fund what that ultimate benefit would be. Now we call this a defined benefit plan, but the contributions are also set in statute. So you could question whether it's strictly a defined benefit plan when you have defined contributions in statute. you could debate it, but really the thing that is probably more variable of those two is the contribution. That's the part that tends to get changed, readdressed more frequently or looked at. That's part of what the actuary does, is to reestablish over time what that amount should be. And the valuation process is the work done to establish what is that initial contribution to meet these desired benefit levels that we've asked our actuary to value. So if you look at on this page and look at, this is what happens in this plan. Hypothetical member, if they start at 25, work until the age of an unreduced benefit, and start taking a distribution at that time. You can see there's something very valuable going on in these late years of accumulation. It's really the power of compound interest happening. It's a very valuable thing. And if we look on the next page, see what happens when the age for unreduced benefit is earlier. So in this example, I just use 55 to make it more obvious kind of what happens when you go through this process. That if you keep everything the same, move the age for unreduced benefits earlier, don't have the amount of time to accumulate the funds needed to pay benefits, and you've accelerated when the payment's due. You've taken off 10 years of the funding period, added 10 years to the payout period. And it's not necessarily a linear thing, meaning in this example, we reduced the payout period or the pay-in period by 25%, from 40 years to 30 years. The accumulation of assets dropped by 60%. So it's a pretty significant impact, and that's why you can't have as much of early, when early retirement happens, the benefit gets reduced. We call it an actuarially equivalent reduction. Some people call it a penalty, but we call it actuarially equivalent because it's the same amount paid out just over a longer period of time. And it's a consequence of the contributions not having the magic of the compounding interest to help out. And then if we go to the next page is taking a step of, well, if you change the plan to not have the reduction for early retirement, so that it's unreduced at 55. In this case, we also looked at the higher multiplier and a higher post-retirement increase. The benefit is quite a bit higher because it doesn't have that reduction. But if you don't have that pay-in period, a change in the pay-in period, you have to double the contributions to get to that same point. So that's all case if there's still pre-funding of that benefit. So if you're shortening the pay-in period, lengthening the payout period, increasing the multiplier, increasing the post-retirement protection, you would probably have to double the cost over that same period of time if you're pre-funding for that whole period of time. If you're not pre-funding during that period of time, that means that member isn't contributing to that cost. There needs to be another way to fund the cost of that benefit. That is not included in the study that we had done. Next page is just to emphasize that there's a lot of assumptions that go on. These examples were greatly simplified. They noted there's assumptions, but there's demographic assumptions, there's economic assumptions. The demographic assumptions get revisited in our plan every 4 years. I would very much encourage that if there's a new plan established, that practice be done. I probably wouldn't wait 4 years. I'd suggest doing it early. So you can kind of keep seeing what's happening with the plan and keep adjusting. Some assumptions are very easy to figure out, some are harder. And there's one in particular that is pretty significant, I think, in this new plan discussion. And it's the withdrawal rates. So withdrawal rates, they call termination rates, turnover rates, the rate at which people leave the plan other than for disability, death, or retirement. And that's pretty significant. Let's just go to my last page. On the top here is the data of who was included in the study by group. A total of 2,248 members. Their average age is 43.2. Their average service is 12.6. That means their average entry age is 31.2. And the entry age is important because that's the age at which the funding starts. For comparison, look on the last row is the para-correctional plan. That group has the same average entry age, but their average service is 7 years. See, because they have very high turnover there. This would be an indication that the turnover in the correctional group is quite a bit higher than in the group that we're studying. If there's high turnover in a group, it means that members are coming in, they are contributing, their employer's contributing, but they may leave before they get a benefit. They'll take a refund usually of their contributions, but the employer contributions are used to fund the benefits for those that stay in the plan. So if you have that high turnover, it often leads to a lower cost. And I wanted to talk about this last week as a preview because you can have two groups of employees in two separate professions have the same benefits, but they may have different costs because the costs are driven by assumptions. That's something that I think we're seeing with this. That's really all I wanted to cover in advance. Plenty of time for them to.
Are there any questions for Doug?
I actually have one. First of all, Doug, thank you so much for allowing us to view the para board meeting. That was nice. It was interesting to see it. So I got a sneak peek at both presentations. My one question, well, I guess I have two questions. The first one is, why did you use 55 for the unreduced retirement plan in this if the actuarial study was looking at 60? Because it seems to misrepresent information a little bit.
Yeah, the intention wasn't to misrepresent, it was just to try to show an example.
Okay.
And to kind of make it a clearer example. Although I would note that we have had groups that have been interested in seeing results at age 55.
Well, who wouldn't? And then I guess that was my other follow-up question is there was a comment made at the that people on this group were asking for 55 and I didn't remember hearing that. So I listened to all the recordings and I didn't hear it. So I just wanted to make sure that Para understands that no one at this table is asking for 55. We understand that we're looking at 60 per the actuarial study.
Questions? Thank you, Doug. Then we'll move on to the new plan actuarial study. And that is a presentation by Bonnie Wurst and Sherry Christensen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bonnie Wurst. This is Sherry Christensen, and we've prepared a presentation to walk you through some additional kind of how does actuarial funding work, some examples. and then also ultimately present the costs of the plan that was studied. So if we jump to page 2, you'll see the characteristics of the participant group that was included in our study. And this is consistent with the information that Doug just showed you briefly. So we received 3 data files from Para, and one of them contained 911 officers, another was parole, and another was probation. And we matched up those records with our Para general plan valuation as of July 1st, 2024, because we have a pretty complete database as of that group. And we identified the records that were active in the general plan as of 2024, and also were in these membership groups of probation, parole, and 911. So the total count evaluated for the study, there were 2,248. You can see the total payroll, projected payroll for the group, and the average age, which varies a little bit by group, but ultimately the average age of this group is 43.2, and the average service is about 12 and a half years. So this is the membership group upon which all of our numbers, liabilities, and normal costs, et cetera, were calculated. On the next slide, we want to just kind of describe how we look at the potential new plan. At retirement, the members in the future would receive a combination of their general plan pension that they've earned up until the new plan is created and established. And they would also receive a pension based on a portion of the career, based on service earned once the new plan is effective. So the general plan pension in a way is frozen. And on the first day of the new plan, everybody starts with no service, no benefit, and then it's all accumulated going forward. So I said the general plan benefit is based on, everything that's being earned in the general plan at this time. But we want to point out that the service is frozen. However, Minnesota statutes allow for future salary increases in another plan to count towards that original frozen benefit. And so we have estimated the impact of members in this study continuing to accumulate salary growth in the new plan after the effective date of the new plan. And for purposes of this study, the effective date used for the new plan was July 1st, 2024, because you may know that actuaries do an annual valuation, and the most recent one was July 1st, 2024. We are in the process, we're just beginning to calculate the numbers as of July 1st, 2025. And so everything is kind of synchronized as of July 1st, 2024, assuming general plan benefits are earned through July 1st, 2024, and then beginning on July 2nd, 2024, or the 1st, that service will begin to be earned in the new plan, and that at retirement, members would generally receive a combination. If you're hired on August 1st, after the plan is in effect, then you're completely in the new plan. You, in theory, haven't earned any general plan benefits. So this is called the prospective plan design, where service is earned on a forward-looking basis once the plan is established. All right, so if we go forward 2 pages, we're going to kind of pick up where Doug left off in terms of how benefits are pre-funded. What the heck do actuaries do, if you will? So this example is just an example. It doesn't have any tie to the new plan or the general plan. But let's presume that we are funding a $10,000 a year pension for a single person. That's our goal, that's our mission. If we look at the bottom of the page, we know that the present value of benefits at retirement, which in this example, we're assuming is age 60, is $90,000. So what we're saying is that if we have $90,000 at age 60, and this person is younger than that, then we expect that to be the right amount to pay a benefit to this person for his or her lifetime. So goal $90,000 at age 60. But this person is younger than that right now. So if we look to the upper right, that $25,000 item, we call that the present value of benefits at the valuation date. So if, for example, this member is currently 45 years old, he or she has 15 years remaining to earn interest on $25,000, and theoretically get to the $90,000 in the future. So what the $25,000 represents is if you had that amount today and invested it, it would grow with no future contributions to the goal of the $90,000 at retirement. So that would be, that's a current present value. The additional step that we take is to say, well, $25,000 would be great, no future contributions, but for equity, we really want to have contributions going in over an entire career, including in the future between age 45 and 60. So if we look at the numbers on the left-hand side, we allocate that $25,000 to the past based on service to the valuation date. And in this example, we're calling that $13,000. And we also allocate it to the future. We're saying that we have 15 years to accumulate additional contributions and interest. And so the numbers just kind of go through the cycle and break down to the numbers on the left, which is what we use to recommend contributions. So $13,000 is the actual accrued liability. That's based on service through the valuation date. And then the part that's allocated to the future that we expect contributions to be made on behalf of is $12,000 in this example. And the next few slides kind of take it through the future. So here you see all of the same numbers, but we want to pause and talk about normal cost. This hypothetical person is hired at age 30, will retire at age 60, and we've talked about the accrued liability for past service and the future normal cost for the future. One slice of that career, 1 year's worth of liability is called the normal cost. It's the portion of the present value of benefits, or the $25,000, attributable to the current year or 1 year. And so in this person's career, it's 30 years. So there are 30 normal costs, which are intended to be equal as a percent of pay or as a dollar amount. And so we could really divide it into 30 normal costs and say that 15 of them have already occurred and contributions have been made, but we need to do 15 in the future, and 1 year is right in front of us. And so every year we need to fund that normal cost and get there. So those are some of the quick definitions. The next slide, we take the same example a few years into the future. Previous slide assumed the person was 45, now they're age 50. So the accrued liability is larger and the future normal cost is smaller, but the normal cost is really the same as it was designed to be in the beginning. We're getting closer to a $90,000 level, which is gauged on the left side too. The next slide, let's say we're at 55. Again, accrued liability larger, future normal cost smaller. And in the final step of pre-funding, on the next slide, the accrued liability is equal to 90,000 because they're at age 60 and it's the magic date, and there's no future career remaining. So if we take all of our numbers and boil it down to an individual, that's kind of an example of how it steps through a career. On the next slide, slide 10, what are the takeaways from this example? In this example, benefits are funded over a 30-year period. In the proposed new plan, the new hires on day one are coming over from the general plan, and in a lot of cases, they're mid-career. And so the new people don't look like the typical new person coming into a pension plan. The average age of new participants as of July 1st, 2024, in our study with the 2,248 participants, the average age is 43.2, because they already have earned, they've already been in a career and they've earned service in the general plan. So the difference from 43.2 to age 60 is much, much shorter than from 30 to 60. And it's just important to understand that a shorter funding period results in higher normal costs because we are funding the benefit over a shorter or more compressed time period. There's less time to make contributions and there's less time to accumulate interest on those contributions. So the thing to remember is the age 43.2 average entry age of this new plan is driving a higher normal cost than if everybody was coming in at age 30 or age 25 or just a mix, which is what we typically see. All right. So we're going to start by saying what would the impact of this proposed plan be on the general plan? And so on this slide, we're kind of demonstrating again some of those actuarial terms, the present value of benefits, the actuarial accrued liability, the future normal costs. And for the actual general plan for para, as of July 1st, 2024, you can see that the slice of future normal costs is actually kind of small versus if you compared it to an active member partway through the career. That's because most pension plans today are relatively mature. Every retiree in Para General has fully accrued their benefit. They don't have a future normal cost. But in any case, the baseline, the numbers shown on this page are for the general plan as if there were no changes. These are straight from our valuation as of July 1st, 2024. And on the next slide, again, baseline July 1st, 2024 general plan valuation results. We calculate a recommended actuarial contribution. And then that is compared to statutory contributions, which are fixed in statute and actually being collected. So for the general plan, again, assuming no new plan changes, we are recommending a contribution for normal costs and annual expenses, and that's 8.84% of pay. And because the assets are lower than the actuarial accrued liability, there's an unfunded accrued liability of $3.7 billion. And in order to finance or pay off that unfunded liability over a statutory period of 24 years, the contribution recommendation is 2.83% of pay. And the sum is 11.67% of pay. So this calculation basically says for the general plan before any changes, if you collect 11.67% of pay for the next 24 years, we expect your plan will be fully funded. And from that point on, your cost will just be normal cost and not an unfunded, no payment for an unfunded liability. On the right-hand side, we note the 2024 statutory contribution, what's actually being collected per statute. Members contribute 6.5% of pay, employers contribute 7.5% of pay. And there are state contributions related to the Minneapolis plan that are temporarily worth 0.44% of pay, and they have an end date that's coming up. So if we just look at the 6.5 and 7.5, that adds up to 14% of pay. So you're collecting 14% of pay. The actuarial cost is 11.67 as of this measurement. And that means that there's a contribution sufficiency, that you're actually taking in more than what you would need to reach your goal in 24 years. And these numbers move around every single year because assets go up and down. The assets go up, but maybe not as much as expected or more than expected. And then we also have membership changes, which are reflected every year. So this is just a point in time measurement. But based on this, that contribution sufficiency indicates that the plan is projected to reach 100% funding earlier than 24 years. Maybe less than 10 years or something like that. So this is all the setting the stage before any new plan. On slide 14. Again, if the new plan is created, this study assumes that probation, parole, and 911 telecommunicators would stop earning service in the general plan. Their benefits from the general plan would be based on frozen service, but would reflect future salary increases in a Minnesota pension plan. And so we are including the impact of those future salary increases on the general plan liability. Liability associated with future service in the general plan is eliminated, and employee and employer contributions would cease to the general plan. And on the next slide, we show the numbers for the general plan. So the first column represents the recommended contribution. We talked about the 11.67%. The first column is consistent with the exhibits that we just kind of walked through. That represents the baseline, the general plan with no changes. The second column reflects the removal of the 2,248 potential new plan members as of July 1st, 2024. So projected annual earnings is lower, and present value of future benefits is lower, actuarial accrued liability is lower, because all of that service was kind of the cutoff from the future. If we talk through the required contribution that we've calculated, the normal cost actually went up slightly as a percent of pay. And what's happening there is that for the group that was removed, there's the normal cost as a dollar amount that remains with the general plan is lower because there's fewer people. But the payroll on which it's based is also lower, and so it ultimately ends up kind of slightly increasing the normal cost as a percent of pay remaining in the general plan. Another way to look at it is that the group that is removed and put into the new plan, on average, have a lower normal cost than the total aggregate group. So it's just 3 basis points, but that's what's happening there. The normal cost was reduced as a dollar, but because payroll was also reduced, the division resulted in a slight increase. The amortization of the unfunded liability goes down, and the expenses are assumed to be the same. So we are showing a reduction in the total required contribution for the general plan in the future of 6 basis points, negative 0.06% is the reduction, or $27.3 million a year. We show a reduction in the present value of future benefits of $211.5 million. And so as said, liability is reduced, but we need to remember that these participants will no longer be contributing to the general plan, nor their employers. So the reduction in future contributions is also needs to be taken into account. And so the last row in the chart shows the present value of future employee contributions would go down by 113.6 million. That's just the employee. If we doubled it, that would be 227 million. And that's actually, it's showing that the reduction in future contributions is actually more than the reduction in liability. So something to think about, that this does have an impact on the general plan, even though it's a very big plan and this is a relatively small group. That's what these numbers represent for the general plan. Okay, we'll move on now to the new plan, beginning on slide 17. Thank you. So we'll start by defining what benefits were evaluated in this study. It's important to point out that these plan provisions were provided to us by PARA based on discussions with stakeholders. So I think they'll be familiar to you, but the unreduced normal retirement age in the general plan is currently age 66, and in the new plan, it's assumed to be 60. The earliest retirement age is 50, and it's presumed that benefits will be actuarially reduced to keep kind of the same present values, no matter the retirement age. The benefit multiplier is set at 2.2% of final average service. And for disability eligibility, we looked at 2 scenarios, which we'll present to you. And the first one assumes that disability benefits are similar to the general plan disability. And the second scenario assumes that disability benefits are similar to the police and fire plan. So they're kind of two fence posts, if you will, and the discussion about disability benefits and what's appropriate for this new plan. You know, maybe neither, maybe it's somewhere in between. We're not sure, but we'll talk more about that. The disability eligibility, again, those are the two scenarios. And for the general plan currently, the benefit paid is equal to an unreduced benefit payable immediately at disability. It's just whatever that benefit has been earned. And the other scenario would be the benefit paid is also equal to that, but with a minimum of years of service. And it's also more, the police and fire scenario is also more likely to become eligible for disability. All right, COLAs or post-retirement benefit increases. The general plan currently pays or going forward based on this year's legislative change, the post-retirement benefit increase is based on CPI with a 1% floor and a 1.75% maximum. Proposed for the new plan is just like Para's correctional plan. It would be CPI with a 1% minimum and a 2.5% maximum. So that is like local correctional. And I'll also point out that the 2.2% multiplier is also like Para local correctional. Member contributions for the general plan are at 6.5%, and for the new plan, we're simply saying to be determined because you need to know cost before you can set a contribution. That's what we're here for today. So on slide 18, we work through some examples of how the formulas actually work for a sample member. The first bullet, the sample is for a member hired at age 30, retires at age 60, with a final average pay at age 60 of $100,000. Again, theoretical sample. If this member participated in the general plan for their entire career, their benefit would be equal to 1.7% times 30 years of service times the $100,000 average salary at retirement times early retirement reduction factor of it's about 58%. And that equates to $29,550. And as you know, the age 60 is an early reduced benefit in the general plan. And so that's why we have that 58% adjustment factor. If we calculate a benefit based entirely on the new plan provisions and assume this person is in the new plan for their entire career, we would have a multiplier of 2.2% for 30 years of service times the $100,000 and no early retirement factor because age 60 is an unreduced benefit. So that produces a benefit of $66,000 at age 60. Higher multiplier and no early retirement reduction. The reality under a proposed new plan would be that many members would have split benefits, a benefit from general, a benefit from new. And so the last example basically says, what if this person was in the general plan for 15 years and then finished out their career with 15 years in the new plan? And so you can see the calculations. The general plan benefit would be based on 15 years of service and would still be reduced for early retirement. And so it'd be almost $50,000 a year. The new plan benefit would be earned at 15 years and the benefit there would be $33,000. And so that member would be receiving the sum of those two benefits subject to different post-retirement benefit increase structures in the future from each of the plans in theory. So just kind of wanted to reinforce that starting at 0 in the new plan. Is that okay? Okay. Next slide is assumptions. We had to set assumptions about what will happen in the future, like Doug described, in order to calculate costs. So if we first talk about future salary increases, which affect a benefit, right? So we're calculating future pay to calculate future benefits. The assumed future increases in salary used for this study of the new plan are based on actual experience for the 2,248 members. We looked at how their specific pay grew over the last 5 or more years. We kind of did a mini experience study for this specific group. We didn't borrow information from the general plan or the local correctional plan or anything. The second bullet is about withdrawal or incidents of termination turnover. For the study, we assumed withdrawal to be the same as the general plan. As Doug observed in one of his first slides, we can see based on just average service, average entry age, that the turnover in local correctional appears to be higher than what would be relevant for this particular group. And so we made a decision to use the general plan turnover assumptions. Next up is retirement. What's a reasonable assumption about retirement ages? And so it's custom for this new plan, but with a normal retirement of age 60, we would expect fairly modest early retirements, but some under age 60. And then kind of a fairly big group at age 60 and after. And you can see where all of the rates kind of fall out for this plan. So again, it's based on what we observe in other plans with different normal retirement ages, but it is custom designed for this new plan based on an age 60 normal retirement age.
Just how the percentages don't add up to 100%, so what 25% what?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. It's what it means is that of the active members who are age 60 as of the valuation date, we assume that 25% of them will retire and 75% of them will continue. And then as we continue our evaluation and say, but what do we think will happen next year? We know that 75% of them are still left, and now we're applying an age 61 rate of 20%. So there, you could say that the rates kind of compound against each other. We start with the earliest age of all actives eligible to retire. We're assuming 5% of them will, and then the next year we're looking at 95% of the group, and the next year we're looking at 90% of the group, and so on. So it's one of those examples of where it's just more complicated than it is at appearance, if that makes sense. So
You said you looked at other similar groups, and do you mean in other states or what? And
well,
this relates to this federal law thing. And so just curious, how did you determine that, say, 25% was retired?
yeah. So we'll remind you that these are estimates, and we're definitely, they drive the results, but we want to measure them, make sure they're working going forward. So what I meant when we designed this table of retirement rates and what other groups we looked at is other Minnesota plans. For example, if the normal retirement age is 55, how many are going at 50? How many are waiting until 55? Some are trickling out early, some are trickling, then the rates are pretty strong after that. So we really looked at different examples of tables and experience in Minnesota plans, both the state and local, of what percentages, how are they kind of leading up to a normal retirement age and then after a normal retirement age, and we just shifted it somewhat from 55 to 60 or from 65 to 60, if you will. So definitely art, not science.
It kind of leads to my question, similar but not. That's so this is based on groups, comparing it to groups, other groups in terms of past behavior, what they've done, and it has nothing to do with the example of the person that started at 30 and ended at 60. This is just people, other groups, what they've shown in the past in terms of behavior.
Yes, it's kind of taking the examples from an individual sample to kind of a group example. Like we think most people plan to retire at normal retirement age, but we know some will retire earlier. How many? We have to make an estimate of that. And some will actually work longer. And so, based on pension experience in all other plans, those are just kind of the promises. So this is our estimate of retirement ages in the future for this group versus like one individual. All right, another assumption we made here is that the post-retirement benefit increases, which will be variable and based on CPI, we are assuming they'll be 2% every year in the future. And in reality, they would be sometimes 1%, sometimes 2.5%, and sometimes whatever CPI is, if it lands between that. Again, that's a consistent assumption with correctional plan. So those are assumptions, and the last bullet is important. As actuaries, we just need to remind you that these are only assumptions, and the actual costs of the new plan will depend upon actual experience and actual behavior. And so when Doug talked about looking, starting the plan and then remeasuring it frequently, we would expect to learn some things about retirement age and withdrawal that and salary that we would apply to the assumptions for future measurements. Maybe we overestimated early retirements, maybe we underestimated early retirements. So we would want to look at that once we actually have some behavior to look at. We just don't have that right now. Okay, so moving to the numbers on slide 21. So going forward, these numbers are for the new plan only. And the first scenario we're going to talk about assumes that disability benefits are the same as the general plan. And the general plan has a disability eligibility of total and permanent disability. Person needs to be unable to perform any occupation. And the benefit that's paid as a disability in the general plan is essentially the benefit you've earned through the date of disability payable immediately unreduced for lifetime. The present value of benefits calculated for the new plan is $279 million. The actual accrued liability is zero because as of the very first day of the new plan, nobody has any service. It's a prospective plan. And so everything's in the future, nothing's in the past. So the accrued liability is zero and the assets are zero. But the first contribution collected will be invested, and then the assets and the accrued liability will start to accumulate on day 2 of this new plan. So future normal costs, the entire pie chart is the future, and the normal cost proportion is $27.3 million. And the projected earnings of this group are $192 million. So those are the kind of the components of the liabilities and the normal cost. On the next slide, we show the recommended contribution, again, for disability benefits, same as general plan scenario. The contribution for normal costs is 19.08% of pay. And the unfunded actuarial accrued liability is zero. And so the bottom piece of this, there's no contribution needed to pay off any unfunded liability. And so the recommended contribution for this plan is 19.08% of pay, and it's all normal cost. If we compare that to the general plan, it has a lower normal cost. It has a contribution for the unfunded liability. The recommended contribution was 11.67% of pay for the general plan. So this is significantly higher. And if we compare the 19.08% cost to the 14% of pay that's being collected, 6.5% employee, 7.5% member. It's just kind of another way to look at the cost of this plan. So contributions are expressed as a percent of payroll. They're intended to be level over a person's career as a percent of payroll. And the last bullet is extremely important in this discussion. The 19.08% is elevated because it's based on a brand new plan with a fairly shortened future funding period. Again, the average age of the new people coming to this plan is 43, not 30. Over time, the normal cost of the new plan is expected to trend downward from 19.08% to approximately 14.23% of pay as members retire and are replaced with new hires, as the demographics of a new plan become similar to kind of a future stable status with new hires of all ages, if you will. And over time, as that trends downward, it's really because you're adding more time to your future funding period. You're bringing in some 30 years to balance the 10 years. The second scenario, and then we're almost there. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
When you said it trends down, lowers, is that like every 5 years or every 2 years? Or I mean, could we even bake that into what we put in the statute for contributions?
Yes, so we don't have an exact answer today. But it's expected to be at kind of a status of 14.23% future kind of normal. Once every single person in the initial plan has retired and been replaced. So that is probably at least a 20 to 30 year period. I think it would be safe to look at this as approximately 30 years, because even though there's an average age of 42.3 of this group, there certainly are some members who are young and have a future career in front of them in that person. So the end of it is when all of the initial group have been replaced. And so I think for planning purposes, 30 is a good estimate. And we could follow up, don't have it right now, but we could in theory follow up and use our actuarial valuation process to have everybody kind of retire according to our assumptions. So we could kind of pinpoint that at least on an assumption basis. And we could pinpoint that approximate 30 years. But it's, again, the end of it is when everybody's been replaced. So, and then this room will be full of all the people. So it's a unique situation with the new plan. Again, a shorter funding period, which gradually becomes normal / longer as time goes by. The next scenario, and this is our last set of numbers, so you can take a breath, or I could take a breath. It would be disability, if disability benefits are the same as the police and fire plan. Police and fire disability is payable if the member is unable to perform their current occupation. And the incidence rates are higher because of that versus total and permanent. The police and fire disability benefits build in a 20-year minimum. So someone who becomes disabled with, in theory, 10 years of service has a 20-year minimum disability benefit. And people who retire with or who become disabled with 25 years of service will get credit for all those 25 years. They would get a benefit payable for their lifetime. So this will be more expensive because it's providing a more generous and frequent disability benefit than our other scenario. And on slide 24, we show a normal cost of 24.19%. And again, the bullet at the bottom says over time, the normal cost is expected to trend downward to approximately 18.58% of pay as current members retire and are replaced with new hires.
Ask one quick question. Let's say telecommunicators. We use we're talking about putting in 30 years of service, right? What is, and this is probably more of a question for Doug, but maybe you would have the information too, but what is the average length of service of a telecommunicator? I mean, I could go off my own anecdotal of working with them over the course of my career. You have quite a few that go in and out of the profession that do not put 30 years in, but how many are actually coming in and putting in 30 years?
I do not have the answer to that. I know that in this in this study, the data that we collected indicated that the 911 group had the shortest average service of
Yep.
9.6. Again, that's mid-career. What I don't know is, are they working for 5 or 10 or 20 more years? Are they working until 60 or 50? I do not have an answer to that.
So that could dramatically change a lot of these numbers.
It absolutely could. Yeah. And it's probably safe to assume that turnover will vary by group and turnover will vary by year. You know, some years more people leave than other years. There are economic factors and personal factors that drive all that, but
Well, and I can see if there's if they have a retirement carrot out there, for example, that they'd be more apt to stay in the profession when they know they don't have to work until 66 years old.
Yeah.
Older than at 55 or 60, you end up landing on.
yeah, exactly. The new plan will be expected to change behavior. So part of it is we're trying to predict the future, knowing that the plan itself will change behavior because different decisions will be made, just like you demonstrated.
Right, so it'll be beneficial to be used as a retention tool, overall, just like it is for police and fire. They go into those professions and they end up staying there because of the retirement benefits. Okay, thank you.
And this might not be for you, it might just be for everyone in the room, but who will decide which disability benefit will be applied to our new plan? Right? I mean, looking at these numbers, it's quite a difference. Where does that decision lie?
So we'll see, some data, I think that will be relevant from the Department of Labor and Industry. They're talking about workers' comp.
Sure.
But it's not all that dissimilar in terms of disability rates. I think what we'll see is that disability is more like the general plan. This group though will decide which disability is best suited to this, I think, but obviously we'll be looking at Doug, in particular with Bonnie's assistance on what makes sense, in terms of costing this out. So if you decide to go with the police and fire, you may end up with a higher contribution rate. Whereas if you go general plan, because it actually is better reflective of what you're going to expect from this group, then it will lower the cost. So it's not, way that.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question is, like, we've done a lot of work here and we haven't talked at all about forensic scientists and all of that, all of those classifications that have been brought forward by that particular group of stakeholders. And it just seems to me that we're doing a lot of math here without kind of like getting everybody in and not really knowing what their turnover looks like and how that's going to impact. So doesn't that like back us up a little bit? I mean, I understand that we would change all of the assumptions, but as we're making these decisions without like the full body of data, it feels like a blind spot. And I don't know that you can answer that, right? I mean,
You gotta start somewhere, and they paid a lot of money for this work. So this went to them before we even knew there were forensic scientists in this world. So, thank you very much for doing this work, right? So we have a starting point. But I mean, unless MSRS wants to pay for a study to figure out specifically forensic scientists, we're gonna be making some assumptions here about.
But I mean, para is gonna have forensic scientists too. I mean, not just on the, MSRS side and who's at the Department of Public Safety. I mean, all of the local governments that have these forensic scientists, I mean, this has got to be part of the assumption, does it not?
But I would start first by emphasizing, I think the main numbers that we're talking about here is when you look at the percentage of pay. That's more important to focus on that than the dollar. So that means if the size of the group expands higher or lower, higher really that we're looking at, it may not necessarily change it. We're focusing on 30% pay. Then it had to be the relative size of the group coming in, so if this study is expanded by size of 10%, it's not going to change these results very much. And we don't know where that line is going to be drawn. Oh, so the point well taken is that yes, if the data changes, it has an impact. But so a magnitude issue.
And I just, the other thing is, I just don't have, like, I don't even know, like, on average, is it higher turnover, lower turnover, more of a career path? And some of these things that would impact.
So we've already started pulling together data because I was curious as well, if we were similar to PERA's numbers. And I just need all the classifications that we covered. Because we can track those, we track the job codes, and so that we can pull not just active folks, we can pull retired as well to see. And
So you have a little bit of an indicator from the MSRS side of things, but maybe not so much here because we don't have those titles. Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, I will stop there. The next slide is really just a table of the numbers we talked about, but I think you really want to focus on the 19.08 and 24.19% numbers that we've just given you, as I'm sure you are already. And as a reminder, these estimates are based on the participant group we talked about. They're based on the plan provisions that were disclosed and the assumptions that were used. And if any of those change, the numbers and the results could also change. So if, for example, somebody decides that the multiplier can't be 2.2%, it's going to be 2.5 or 2.0 or just anything, just know that these numbers will change as a direct result to any change in plan provisions, and that the assumptions are a best estimate that will be fine-tuned as more data becomes available in the future. We're trying to predict the future. So assumptions have a great impact on these results, and also the plan provisions do too. So just kind of including thoughts from what to keep in mind as decisions are evaluated. But thank you for your attention, and we'll stay and answer any questions.
I'm gonna make the assumption that the employee paying into the plan, although it would be nice to have the police and fire disability benefits, they don't make the same type of wages that police and fire do generally. Forensic scientists, maybe I noticed, and they're probably the same or similar, or up there at least because of their degrees and stuff. But the chances of telecommunicators, forensic scientists, and probation agents getting injured like police and fire or corrections, I'm gonna make the assumption there's a substantial difference in disabilities there. Do you guys have any information on that at all?
I can't really speak to that. I think that the experts are more in this room, and we can, analyze, calculate numbers, but just don't know the fields as well as others. Yeah.
Like for telecommunications, in the general plan, do you see a lot of disabilities there at all?
I don't know what size. Well, we see the rates of disability that we see come through the general plan are really very low. So I don't notice any specific trend or what groups are coming from there. All I can say is what I hear anecdotally, which is higher rates of psychological challenges among telecommunicators. So I hear that anecdotally, but I have no evidence, hard evidence, or anything that can help our actuaries do their work. And that's a big challenge, I think, with this particular study, is that the hardest part is trying to figure out what the right assumptions to use.
I have one question. Right. How did you figure out, so a lot of people in our jobs move from one agency to another. Police officers do, firefighters do, telecommunicators, probation, corrections. How is that calculated in the turnover? So let's say somebody spends 10 years with one agency, they left, is that considered turnover for them? They go to another one for 5 years, they left, they go to another one for 5 years. How do you do that?
It's a very good question. In general, when we look at turnover, we're considering within a plan. So if someone's moving from an agency to another agency to another agency, but they're not leaving the plan, then that would then we would view that as continued active membership. Because it's a multi-employer
So
plan.
you took those names you got from an employer and then you found them in the plan.
Exactly.
So even though they've been with this agency for 5, you went and dug in there and said, well, they've actually been in the plan for 30.
Exactly.
Is there anyone online that wanted to contribute to an answer to that question?
I think I trying to feel that when he talks about workers' comp.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments before we move to the next item?
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we're moving back to Doug for the new current plan policy.
Yeah, I just have to like share this one slide because I had a chance at our board meeting to hear from your buying presentation. And I was trying to figure out how do I get this straight and simplified in my own head. When I came up with an answer, if I could share this. So the way that I think about what I heard is that that darker line at the top is what I'm hearing from Bonnie, that the initial cost is 19.08%. And then it trends down to 14 something over around 30 years. That's the estimated cost that we're hearing of this new plan. And the features of that new plan are shown in that box. And then I was trying to figure out, well, what do I compare that to? And what I think, how I think it should be compared to, tied back to page 13 of Bonnie's presentation of the current plan costs. And I think of it as currently the contribution rates that are assessed to that plan are 6.5% of the employee, 7.5% of the employer. That's 14%. We get another 0.44 from Minneapolis. That's because they merged 10 years ago. We'll get that for a few more years. I think that's irrelevant to this. So I excluded that. So those are the scheduled contributions. There is a provision that 1% of the employer contribution, 1% of the 6.5, of the 7.5, sorry, will go away when the plan nears full funding. So this plan is projected to reach full funding. The provision used to be that the 7.5% contribution will go down to 6.5 when the plan is 100% funded. That changed last year to say when the plan is 98% funded. It all had to do with the increase to the retirees, to the increase in the formula for post-retirement increase. It was kind of tied to that deal. So point is, it's projected that the employer contribution drops down if all assumptions are met by 1%. And then the plan would reach full funding, and in theory, all the contributions needed to help fully fund the plan would go away. And you would only need the normal cost to fund the benefits that are accrued. I say in theory because you have to assume all assumptions are met, no benefit changes are made, and the contributions are reduced to the normal cost. If you assume all that, the contributions in this plan would drop down to the normal cost and it would go on indefinitely. It's a fully funded plan. It only costs what the active members are. That's the goal. That's kind of the expectation. The great thing that I added is my opinion, what would be a more likely path is that no one waits around till the plan is 100% funded and says, hey, let's lower the contributions. There's usually an effort to raise the benefits in some way. Not unlike how the general plan, the postal term increases were raised a little bit. So this is, in my opinion, a more likely path is that over time, as the plan gets closer to fully funded, there may be a little bit of a benefit increase, there may be a contribution reduction, compromise on that, and it would flow more in that pattern. That's, in my mind, what was helpful to understand what's the gap between the new plan cost and the current plan cost, and how does that change? That's what I just asked. And just two last things. One is there's an orange arrow pointing down in 2036. That means nothing. I don't know. I didn't. Then you didn't see it all.
Easter egg.
And then
When you're retiring, right?
I do one more thing. It goes back, I'm sorry to quote the way you said earlier, that I mentioned to the board that there was interest in age 55. Your retirement. I stand by that because I did see that in the July 31st materials. Yeah, and it's in the summary that the LCDR put together. So, what was it? Asked on me about the priorities. So I just kind of wanted to, like, I did hear it, and if that's not accurate, I think those memos should be corrected.
I appreciate that. And again, just for me, it was more, I think we all have been moving ahead with the marching orders of 60. And that's what all the documentation was. So I was kind of taken aback. So I just wanted to put that out there and clear the air.
Let's say from my, from what I've heard is I've heard about 55 from one group, I've heard 60 from another group. And this has been over several years.
Right.
So that's
Right.
kind of how I think about the two sides. Both of them. Both of them.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Doug. Then we'll move to item 3, which is Department of Labor and Industry Workers Compensation Data. And that will be a presentation from Brian Zaidman and Quentin Santo, and you can take it away.
Very good. I'll share my screen. I'll be presenting. I'm Brian Zaidman, and I'll be giving this presentation here. I will warn you that I updated it slightly. Is it shared? Yes, right?
Yep, we can see it, Brian.
Good. Okay, good. Okay. So I'd made just a couple changes just actually to clarify something, added a couple of other bullets and some axis titles. It's still 99% the same, and it's improved. So let's get to the next slide here. Just about the workers' compensation data that I have here. This is based on the claims database at the Department of Labor and Industry. Insurers and self-insured employers are required to report claims with more than 3 days of work disability. Shorter duration claims are generally not reported. So what I'm going to really showing information about is that more severe set of claims. Overall, in the state, about only about 20 to 25% of all claims have more than 3 days of work disability. What I'm going to show you are based on the percentage of the filed claims or of the accepted claims, depending on the table. So we aren't showing percentages of the total number of workers or even of the total number of claims. It's for many of them, it's the number of accepted claims. I'm only showing data here in the slides on the non-COVID claims. There was a big bump in the number of claims in the 2020 to 2023 period because of COVID. A number of local government employees and state government employees were covered by the presumption, and there were many thousands and thousands of claims filed, but that's not what's going to be happening going forward. That's not what we're seeing today. But it was there in the recent past, so I cleared out all the COVID-19 claims. The slides I'm showing are going to focus almost all of them on local government. I don't even label it local government. They're all local government claims. There are some state government numbers in there, but I believe you may have the spreadsheets as a handout, or that'll be available for you to look at here. So let's get on to the next slide. This is the number of claims filed in 3-year periods. And I chose 3-year periods because when you just go to each individual year, you get some years with just 1 or 2 or even 0 claims, especially among telecommunicators. So you can see telecommunicators and probation officers are down here at the bottom. Fewer than 30 claims every 3 years. So that's what it looks like. In contrast, we have local government corrections and then state government corrections workers showing how many claims are filed over this time period. And I didn't show the number for all other local or state government workers because those are in the thousands and they would just dwarf all these other numbers. So just as there are thousands of claims filed from local government every year. Also, so I did want to mention here that there were some, I'm showing local government because there are just a very few state government workers that were telecommunicators. There's just a handful of claims, and and you really couldn't tell anything from them from half dozen claims over 20 years. And there are just about 35 claims that were coded as probation officers from the state government. A large percentage of those claims were COVID. So once we took those away, there were, again, maybe a dozen non-COVID claims from state government. Probation, the state, and those state government workers were then, the state government probation officers were added to the state corrections numbers in the spreadsheet, and the state telecommunicators were put into all other state government workers. So this is the percentage of claims that were accepted. This is in this most recent 6-year period. So immediately you see that telecommunicators have a lower claims acceptance rate than the probation officers, local government corrections officers, or all other local government workers, just slightly lower, but everybody else was above 80%. Now, generally, primary liability determinations are received about 2 to 3 weeks after a claim is initially reported to the Department of Labor and Industry. And some reported claims do not qualify for indemnity benefits when it's determined that the worker has not experienced more than 3 days of work disability. So this shows that this is among the claims that were had a decision, a determination. So it's between acceptance and denial. And so the remainder of the claims, some like 23% of telecommunicators claims were denied, where they experienced more than 3 days of work disability. Overall, and this is the one overall set of numbers that I do have, acceptance rate per 1,000 workers was 0.7 claims per 1,000 worker telecommunicators and 3.8 claims per 1,000 probation officers, 3.8 claims per 1,000 workers. So there's a very different dynamics going on in terms of the claims per workers, injured and non-injured. And as you can see, overall with the numbers of accepted claims, they are relatively small numbers, 27 over 6 years, 42 for probation officers versus some 300 for corrections and over 1,200 for other local government workers. And as I said in the first bullet, only 7 telecommunicators in the 2021 to 2023 period received indemnity benefits. So that's something, keep in mind that number just dropped off. So the other 20 and I wouldn't say that. This is the total number of claims, not the accepted claims. So it's 77% of the 27. There's some 20, thereabouts, 20 workers received, telecommunicators had indemnity benefits. As far as gender, it is not surprising. Telecommunicators are, the majority are female. For the other workers, probation officers, corrections, and other local government workers, majority are male. This is for the accepted claims in the last 6 years. The 21 accepted claims that we have for telecommunicators. The age distribution, it shows that they were similar.
We have a
Yes?
question in the room. Go ahead, Jar.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. What does that do, that demographic there, in regards to anything that's kind of known about male versus female and workman's comp? I mean, do you find that men have more issues or file it versus women who have to be head of households and stay in the workforce? Or, I mean, anything in the industry that's notable? I'm just curious.
Good question. There isn't a whole lot of difference that we found that is consistent. We'd have to look a lot more. There's nothing that stands out that is shows that the acceptance rate or claim denial rate, either way you look at it, are wholly different, or the dispute rates are not greatly, there's no large difference or consistent difference across different industries. When you look at male versus female, I could put something together to look at more generally, but it often is not. As far as work comp in general is concerned, because women are more likely to have lower income jobs than males, or they have the same jobs but are paid a lower income, so their benefits are slightly less than what male workers are getting. So that's the real difference in workers' compensation. I don't think there are, in terms of permanent disability or length of disability, that there were large differences that couldn't be explained for other reasons, such as age or type of injury. So it's not a hugely determinative factor, other than in work comp when we're looking at benefits. That's often one reason that there's a difference here, just for the type of work that's going on. But as far as overall, like injury rates, healthcare in general is the highest injury rate industry in Minnesota, and the majority of those workers are female workers in healthcare. So there's a huge group of female workers injured at a very high rate, a high number, and that's a large characteristic of Minnesota's system. Just when you consider that just the large impact on our economy, on our size of healthcare. So there's quite a as we're probably aware, just the concentrations, gender concentrations. Yeah.
We have another question or comment from
Okay.
Ed. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay.
Quick question pertaining to the telecommunicators and obviously a huge amount of those workers are women. What are the demographics, male-female split? In that
Overall,
yeah, and then just
No,
communications.
that I do not have. I guess that can be looked at. That sort of information would probably exist at the Department of Employment and Economic Development. At Labor and Industry, we have a lot of information about injured workers and not that much information about people who aren't injured. So it's a warped world that I live in.
I think you answered the question. You can continue, please.
Okay. Very good. So here we're looking at the age distribution, and they were telecommunicators and probation officers. Looking at them, were similar to each other and in general to the other local government workers. Again, in all of the slides, telecommunicators are the dark blue, probation officers are the green, and the majority of the injured workers, or at least the largest single group, is in the 45 to 54-year-old range, and that's true for most of the workers, other than corrections, where corrections are slightly younger than all other workers or the telecommunicators. And then there's a large proportion where corrections workers are retiring in the 55 to 64-year-old age range, but there's probation officers, telecommunicators, a lot in 55 to 64. And I had no claims in the 65 or more category. But there's that substantial group there, but that's also similar to all other local government workers. So they're very similar to the other people that they're working with. So now we can go to job tenure, and here it's the longer job tenure were evident for telecommunicators and probation officers. So even though their ages weren't necessarily different from other workers, a large jump in the injured workers, telecommunicators here in this 15 to 20, and you can see in 25 or more. Among probation officers, 20 to 25 or 25 plus. You put those together, some 15 and 20, that's like 40% or more of the probation officers were injured, were well on into their careers, much more so than other government workers. And you can see quite a lot of the injuries, just to go through that, a lot of injured workers were here in this fewer than 5 years period, where some of the on-the-job learning takes place, and it's overall in all industries, this fewer than 5 years, and especially even fewer than it's 1 year or less, is just disproportionately high percentage of injured workers among the new hires. And this is by location of the injured workers. And you can see here that the probation officers were much more concentrated in the 7-county Twin Cities metro area. More so than telecommunicators and corrections, other local government were very similar, but it was quite different for the probation officers. And this is how, these are the nature of injury. Sprains and strains and tears were the largest number for all 3 worker groups, and the largest percentage, and especially here for probation officers. And then you have this other very noticeable, these are the top 4 categories among these local government workers that I showed. There's many other different natures of injury. There's fractures and lacerations and everything, and they're much lower, relatively speaking, lower percentages. And so mental disorders and syndromes really stands out here among telecommunicators. Again, overall, what we had data for were for 18 claims. So it's, you know, here some eight workers thereabouts. But 8 of the 18 were mental disorders in the last 6 years. And overall, when we look at our, we just concluded a major PTSD study for the legislature. And in our PTSD claims database, telecommunicators, they had 15 PTSD claims, and 11 of those 15 were paid from the 2014 to 2023 period. So that says, you know, that given the number of workers that there were over that time period, so it's higher than the population as a whole, but it wasn't any more than 1 or 2 claims a year. But when they did have it, they were more often than not received benefits. And telecommunicators were covered under the presumption. The presumption started in 2019, the presumption of work relatedness. So telecommunicators are covered under the presumption. Probation officers are not. And probation officers, and there's 2 to 3 times more probation officers than telecommunicators, but they only had, that we identified, 2 claims. 2 claims were filed. One was dropped, and the other was not PTSD and was denied. So there's a very different dynamic going on in mental disorders and symptoms, which is why there is no green bar here, why it's missing. Probation officers are not filing claims for PTSD. And this is the event categories of how it happened. Interestingly, you can see violence is very large proportion of the claims by the type of event that created the claim. Among probation officers, they're similar of these groups to corrections workers. Probation officers, corrections workers, they're getting injured because of violence. All the groups suffered from falls, slips, and trips extensively. And then there's overexertion bodily reaction. And it's the most common, over 60% of the claims for the telecommunicators. And these overexertions are what leads to the sprains and strains. Now, we also have a lot of falls, slips, and trips, as I said, and that's often due when we read through the injury narratives, slipping on streets, sidewalks, and parking lots, and people fall and they're injured. So this just in the course of just getting in and out of cars for the most part. Some of them, I know one claim was actually one fall, and I think I recorded it. And these are, I was going to say, these are separate from violence. So if someone was fell in the course of an assault, that would be under the violence, or it should be. But some of this, again, overexertion, bodily reaction, these are also include musculoskeletal injuries, strain, issues with sitting for long periods of time as well. That's something that goes into the bodily reaction and overexertion group. And now we'll move on to the benefits. And this is among closed claims, the non-COVID closed claims from 2018 to 2024. And again, here you see telecommunicators are a bit different. The median value of the weeks was much higher than for the other groups. Probation officers were less than 2 weeks at the median. So there were in all the groups a few claims that were very, very long. And the mean values, the average value, was heavily influenced by these a few very high long duration claims. So that's why I chose the median here, because otherwise it'd be like 10 or 12 weeks here, and as well for probation officers, they're all very long, but most of the claims were much, much shorter. And this shows you where the half of the claims were less than 6 weeks for telecommunicators. And it was even overall for local government workers, 2.5 weeks is standard. What went on there? And then there's permanent disability issues where it's often paid either as permanent partial disability or a settlement. And here, most of the claims do not have permanent disability or a settlement. They have neither, and there's just short-term claims like we saw, just a few weeks, and then they close and there's no issues. And telecommunicators, unlike the other groups, had the highest rate of workers receiving a settlement only. So they didn't receive benefits, ongoing benefits, very likely. They did not receive permanent disability benefits. They worked through an attorney, and their attorney met with their employer's attorney, and they worked out a settlement. And so that was for more than 40% of the claims. And that's how their disability was taken care of through a settlement. So that was something that stood out in the data. And then also looking at how many claims there were that were very long duration. Most of the claims, as you can see, were very short duration. And this gives you an idea. I put in the state workers as well here, and what are the numbers of overall number of workers, the number of workers with a temp total disability 1 year or longer. So 3 of the 55 communicator claims there, which is 5.5%, were 1 year or longer on disability payments. None for the probation officers. And then overall, the telecommunicators were similar to other public workers, local government, or even state government workers in general. Is a little bit higher, but not drastically higher. This is really what stood out. The probation officers, they were not paid weekly benefits for long periods of time. And as you could see over here with the most of them did not have any permanent disability. They had the highest group without any permanent disability, which is consistent with not having a disability of 1 year or longer. So that's an overview of what we have in the workers' compensation realm. Again, it's a relatively small number of claims that we have compared to what's in all other public workers and state government workers as well. So there's large numbers of things here, but there are, and you know, while we'd like to see or have, in theory, larger numbers of claims to be able to give them more specific, it's just as well that we don't have lots of injured workers in these groups to talk about. That's actually a good thing. And it's a problem many other industries would really like to have, and other work groups. So here's how to contact us if there are questions. And I do want to say, take a look. I'm sure many people here have issues with the workers with PTSD. And if you do go to the DLI site, you can find our PTSD report, Minnesota DLI PTSD report. It should come up that way. And that's a massive report. And it takes a good look at what's going on with the mental disability injuries that we have.
Thank you very much for that helpful information. Are there any questions, comments? Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. You're quite welcome.
And I'll turn to staff. How would you like to proceed with the agenda? Do you want to try and get through one more item, or do you want to? Okay, why don't we'll have Susan do this because she won't be with us at the next meeting, and then we'll spend a few minutes doing some housekeeping for future meetings. So go ahead, Susan.
Okay, so I sent part of your materials included a memo that I drafted. I don't have a PowerPoint for that, but I'll just very quickly go over the two things that I looked at. So these are the federal requirements that might be relevant to this group and determining how we're going to set up these two plans. The first has to do with just a basic requirement that generally under the Internal Revenue Code, retirement plan benefits need to be payable upon retirement. And so there are some regulations that define what a normal retirement age is. So I guess I'm jumping to the second part of the memo, which I think is the most relevant here. It's going to probably change slightly what we do in terms of that issue. So normal retirement age is defined in the regulations as being an age that is not earlier than the earliest age that is reasonably representative of the typical retirement age for the industry in which the covered workforce is employed. So the issue that you have there is that there are some safe harbors in the regulations, but if you can't use one of the safe harbors and, for instance, you are setting a retirement age that is under 62, you'll have to prove out that that age is reasonably representative of the typical retirement age for the groups that we're talking about here. So I did include in the memo actual regulation, the language of the regulation, and then also I specifically pulled out the safe harbors that could apply here. So if you pick a retirement age that is age 62 or older, the safe harbor will allow you to just pick that age. Nothing has to be proven out. If it's under 62, then we need to show, based on all the facts and circumstances, what the IRS says, that this is reasonably representative of the retirement age. So how we show that, I'm sure we can pull up a bunch of, private letter rulings and things like that, but primarily it's going to be a data collection effort, most likely, or maybe surveying employers on what they're seeing for retirement age. So we picked an age 60, that is going to require us to prove it out with some data. An interesting thing here is that there is a safe harbor for public safety workers. And if you go into that, which is over on page, it's actually the last page. A qualified public safety employee can pick a retirement age that is much earlier. So age 60, for instance, would be fine for that group. It is defined here on the last page, and this is again out of actually the Internal Revenue Code. It does include police, firefighter, EMS, corrections officers, which is a new addition. Interestingly, it talks about something called forensic security employee. And then it goes on to say providing for the care, custody, control of forensic patients. I don't know whether the forensic investigators fit into that, but I think the important thing is that the group that we're talking about here has to be substantially composed of or includes substantially these types of employees. We won't get there with our forensic folks. So even if they do satisfy the definition, the group we're covering here is not going to ever be, I think, substantially consisting of that sub. So that's normal retirement age.
I think that that's referring to the forensic security. Counselors that be,
Okay, there you go. So that helps. Yeah, we don't have that. Those people on this group. So I went to the second point first, going back to the first point, and that has to do with purchasing credit as service. That one is really easy. There's not going to be a whole lot we have to do on that. So the applicable statute or code section has to do with the limits on benefits. So there's a limit on annual contributions to a defined contribution plan under code section 415 C, I believe. And then under 415B, there's a limit on what the annual benefit is when you start paying it out under a defined benefit plan. So the problem that you come up against here with buying past service credit is the member is going to make a contribution to the plan to buy the past service credit. And then that in turn will mean that the benefit will be bigger at the end for this additional service. And the problem that your people ran into for years here in purchasing this, and again, this really just applies to governmental plans, is that you have an annual contribution limit that applies to the contribution that you're making by the service. But then you also have an annual benefit problem here potentially because your benefit is bigger. And the IRS then came up with some changes here to, I believe it's to the code section that will allow you to satisfy either limit. The great thing about that is that the defined benefit limit on the annual benefit payable at retirement is $280,000. So the chances that any of us will get to have a $280,000 benefit or even get close to that limit is, you know, something we all dream about, but I think we're all going to be fine under the annual limit under 415. So those are the two requirements that I looked at. I think no problem under the 415 limit. The only potential issue then is under the normal retirement age that we're talking about here. If we go with age 60, we're going to have to do some work to prove that out and show that it's reasonably representative of the average age of retirement age of this.
So would that, is that specific to within our state, the reasonable retirement, or nationally? Because it's easy to show nationally that probation has a lower retirement rate. That's easy to prove of. In the state, because of Rule of 90, that might be a little bit different.
So any data will help.
Okay.
So it's just, you know, we can produce something that shows it. And it's really only going to come up if the IRS came in and audited these plans. Pretty unlikely, but we generally don't like to put things into law that are certain patently not in compliance with federal law. So if we can even come up with any data, national, state, otherwise, we'll be close.
Questions for Susan?
I asked the plans if they do apply, say age 60, and your council and see what they have to say on that. Wonderful.
I have a question. When you say retire, do you mean actually collecting the pension or quit? What, does it have to be collecting the pension? Or is it just leaving the field?
So, it has nothing to do with actually what actually is happening. So what everybody does by way of your personal retirement age, has nothing to do with this. This is only when we define it in the plan. The issue is, what is the age at which you take your full benefit and you have no reduction for early retirement?
No, I get that, but what data do we need? That you left the field? People leave the field at age 60 or that they collect their pension at age 60?
You know, there's just no guidance on this. So we just need to come up with something. So, yeah, so I mean, the more we can show, the better off we are. So, yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that, you know, the best we can do is, you know, gather as much as we can. Yeah. Sorry.
And you might have, like, your data set, telecommunicators might look really different than like probation officers as a career. A stable rate, they probably go county to county, but where you're both like likely mainly. You might have them transmitting into another area of public service. Right.
But they leave.
Yes.
That should be pretty easy to pull, wouldn't it, Doug, if they, whatever age they stop paying in, it should, you would know that they're collecting or not.
Yeah, probably, I guess maybe easier for Aaron, because if you track those titles. We have the issues that in order to get this data for this set, we only went back and said, who are the active people at this time? So we don't really have the history behind this. Yeah.
I think R would actually have more anecdotal, like have more anecdotally than like knowing the membership.
Well, and I think there's in here somewhere, Doug, I think you had data that the percent of telecommunicators 60 to 65 or whatever is really small. And they start to trickle out. But that helps. Because yeah, some might go to records or something like that, but they leave this position.
That was complicated. I haven't seen any difference. Maybe I missed it.
I think that was about the retirement rates, which is different than age. But I think we can probably pull some survey data from plan design around the country too.
That would be really helpful.
Oh, actually, that's pretty good if you look around other states. And there might be national data too.
We now have the data for 2023, 2024, and soon 2025, we're starting to build. So I think we could go back to the 2023 data and see who among that group is retired since then. So we're starting to build the data.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. Aaron, are you comfortable going next time, or did you? Okay, go on a dash your dreams.
This is not good now.
Okay, so then let's turn our attention to item 6 on the agenda, which is the next meeting. That will be September 4th at 1:00 p.m. and we'll presumably start with the presentation that we didn't get to today, the overview of MSRS combined service annuities. Staff, are there any recommendations about other agenda items for that meeting? Looks like we're talking about the requirements of the 2025 session law and additional information requested by the stakeholder groups. You want to talk about this?
Yeah,
Okay,
just
that'd be great.
so the session law requires this group to look at several things. And so if you want to pull up the session law at some point, you'll be able to see the many things really that this group was to do. One is the financial impact, resulting from a cessation of benefit accruals and contributions to members. That's really addressed. So I don't think we need to do that one. The option and method for members to purchase credit as service. I think you and Doug both were going to do a presentation. So that could be something that we would have, I think, on the agenda that would cover that off. There's already something in the statute for how to do that, so that would be a good one. Then we have ability to pre-fund benefit improvement. We probably need to talk about that a little bit. We have certainly the best pre-funding mechanism in the country, I think, the one that Aaron oversees, MSR's for comp plan, but we can certainly talk about other stuff. And then this is the big one, I think, any other public safety adjacent position that should be included in the public pension plans. So the issue there is we've got obviously forensic investigators, but we also have 2 other groups that are asking to join in this these pension plans. One of them is like the people that are staff in police departments and fire stations, fire departments, working side by side with officers. Yeah, yes. Yeah, so we would have that group, they could come and give presentation or whatever, and then there's another group, what was it? Police technicians, and property and evidence technicians. So they've been asking us via email, we join this pension plans. We don't know. I don't know what they do. So
They do intake and they inventory the evidence as it comes into the lockers, right? And make sure that it's being destroyed appropriately or ready for administration, if there's some sort of need for evidence production. I suppose.
Well, so I think maybe what this is really is we talk about the job has to be kind of hazardous. I mean, there has to be something about the jobs that are being covered that would be pension plan. So if these are not stressful or hazardous jobs, then the group can say no. That's
I do have a question. So Leah Palmer from DPS wasn't able to come to issues ill, but she had indicated that they have forensic scientists, obviously at the BCA, and she shared that information with me. I don't know if she has shared it with you all. Did she share that with you?
Okay.
I did. We represent about 300 or so, but if we're expanding it to that list of people who do intake evidence, that would also expand it to our IT professionals. So the data collection as well.
Yeah, I just was.
Get big.
I know that the superintendent at the BCA had a number of job titles that. So I just wanted to make sure that Leah had shared it with you. So if that happens, I'm good. Thank you.
Such a big topic. I don't know what you guys.
Yeah, I just think that if we continue to add groups, just call it the general plan. Maybe.
The general.
Yeah.
And share it.
I feel like we're getting kind of really wide about the rest of the intent of the original. Just do it anybody, but what the intent is, I think.
Those that are needed in the session line.
Yeah.
So that would exclude the forensic folks. Because they're not actually in the session law. So I think this group still needs to at least.
Yes.
Could you help us craft kind of an agenda item around that? Okay. Okay, so September 4th at 1. And Scott will be sharing that meeting, and then the following one will be September 15th at 1 o'clock. And we have a potential agenda for that one. You want to go through that? So potentially for that meeting, the balance of employee and employer contributions, including the interest in funding pension benefit improvement with increased employee contributions. So again, another part of the session. So that would be a discussion item. And then new plan features. So that's a pretty long list, that is about, it's like about 10 different features that are identified in the session law that we could start working our way through. Are there any additions to those items?
And I think there's an outstanding item from the last meeting that you and Scott were gonna discuss whether committee members would be allowed present in the room or just continue to do video.
We're gonna talk about that after today and discuss it a little bit. We haven't come up with a resolution. The issue at the end is where we get a group this big at around the table and still have the ability to have people. I talked with that about it. We discussed the Zoom versus just having it broadcast. The normal where people could be able to see it. So my plan was to discuss it after this.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the issue is that having a room where we could fit this many people around a table is probably limited to this room or something very similar with limited outside seating.
No, that's more of the way we're doing it. I just wanted to remind them.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, well, thank you again all for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next on September 5th. Yeah, sorry.
The work group leaves, I'm going to send out, sending out new calendar invites for the next 2 meetings, which is September one, you'll see it in the your calendar. I'll be sending new ones. They were kind of I'm under a new one going forward. So thank you.
That works, Karen. Thank you.
All right. You too. Sartell? 25 minutes. You drive along this. But, I guess like, my family.
Yep. All right, thank you. So, right, so consistent, the most, it's all 18 so well. I was, everybody was shocked. We all had some eyes. So now we would have. I know we have to. Pretty all this is 6 to 8 years of service and 6 years that requirement to play the energy and that. Does that understand? Does that make sense? Right. It would be nice to get okay. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So basically.
No, I would be 6 parallel. Change.
Going forward, it's proactive, forward, or whatever perspective, I guess.
I get no benefits. You have to wait.
Penalty on this guy.
This, yeah.
That one.